Today I'm celebrating the Eclectic Witch's Book of Shadows, Witchy Wisdom at Your Fingertips by Deborah Blake and illustrated by me. I found out that our book is a finalist for the COVR Visionary Award for Best Book Illustration on June 11th. So I'm taking you behind the scenes of the illustration process, step by step, what you would see if you were in my studio when I was creating these illustrations. And we're going to make a snake candle holder that I illustrated in the book. It's pretty easy, so you can manifest one right off the pages of this book. Coming up next. Welcome to the Witch's Studio. I am, of course, Mickey Mueller, author, illustrator, and witch, not necessarily in that order. And today I'm going to show you how I created the illustrations for this book. And we'll bring a witchy candle holder that I drew as part of the illustrations in this book to life. It's a really impressive looking piece, but it's so easy to make yourself. If this sounds like good witchy fun, then you should hit the subscribe button so you'll always know when I post a new spell, witchy tip, or magical item that you could craft yourself. If you haven't subscribed yet, that is the best way to catch my next video quickly. So the COVR Awards is kind of like the Oscars for the metaphysical community. So when I heard that Deborah Blake's book, The Eclectic Witch's Book of Shadows, was up for an award, I was absolutely beside myself. Then I discovered that it was a finalist in the category Best Illustrations. I absolutely could not believe it. I'm not going to be able to attend the award ceremony, so I decided to celebrate with you guys right here instead. Who knows if our book will win? Of course, I hope that it will, but there are lots of other books that are finalists for awards as well. It's absolutely an honor to be among them. Deborah gave me so much inspiration to work with for this book, and I was so glad that Deborah and Llewellyn entrusted me with the wonderful task of illustrating this book. So I thought you might like a peek behind the scenes of the book. That was Deborah's very personal project to create a special book full of information, but that the reader can also make their own. So let's jump into the Wayback Machine and go back to my studio when I was working on these illustrations, and you can see exactly my process of how all the illustrations in this book happened. So the first step for each illustration was to set up a flat lay with items that I have around my house for a reference photo to work from. Then I create a pencil sketch, which is sent to the art department at Llewellyn for approval of concept. Once approved, I start inking. I use Staedtler pigment liners and zebra double-sided brush sign pens. No, this video isn't sponsored by any of the art supplies shown in this video, but these are my tried and true products that I use. I freehand much of it, but when I need to, I use circle templates or straight edges to keep everything looking clean. Once the inking is complete, the pencil lines are erased. The art is scanned, and I open it in Photoshop so I can zoom way in and clean up the lines so everything is perfect. I had regretted the stars and lines around the eye. They just looked distracting to me, so I just decided to take care of that too. Next, I print it out on some high-quality cardstock and start coloring. This is my inner child's favorite step. I love that I get to color for a living. I use Prismacolor pencils for this step. They have really vivid colors and blend well. I've been using Prismacolor for, I don't know, about 30 years. So no, still not a sponsor. Of course, I had to include the stylized versions of a couple of the cards from Everyday Witch Tarot by Deborah Blake and illustrated by Elizabeth Alba. Next, I scan the color version and remove the white background. Drop a parchment texture in, and it's ready to upload to the team at Llewellyn to do their magic. The book interior layout was done by Becky Zins, who placed all the art throughout the book and so much more to make it gorgeous. Shira Atapu designed the cover layout, and of course Lynn Mentorwick, who was the art director at the time, oversaw and kept us all organized while we worked to bring visual beauty to the magical words of the wonderful author Deborah Blake. I'm so glad that I thought ahead to shoot some footage of the illustrations as I was working on it so that I could share it with you here. Of course, as you saw, I personally own some of the items that are in those illustrations since I used items from my magical practice in my home as reference. But I thought it would be fun if you could own something from the book too. And since I wanted to make a snake candle holder like the one I illustrated, I thought I would have you join me while I make it so that you can see how I did it and then you can make one for yourself. If you're not an accomplished sculptor, it's okay. This is so easy, and I'll share my tips to make it an absolutely magical piece. I started off with polymer clay. You can use any color that you like. I had black on hand. Then I went into my copy of the Eclectic Witch's Book of Shadows, and I had made some notes earlier about Hecate in the section on gods and goddesses. So I grabbed the herbs that I had made notes in the book, and I'm going to use those to make a matrix of herbs in my clay. I'll show you how I do that. It's really cool. I have some Scotch tape. This is the mesh bag from some garlic cloves. I've got my mortar and pestle to grind it all up in, and I've got a tea light. This is what we're going to shape it around. I also have some of this craft foam. I'll explain that soon. When I'm doing magical crafting, I also kind of like to light some incense, have candles going, create sacred space to work within to bless the project that I'm creating. Now, I had decided to make this in honor of Hecate because she is a goddess of witchcraft and one that I work with. You could dedicate yours any way you want. You don't have to do it the way I did. I started with mint. That's mint from my garden. Next, I have a little lavender, which is also from my garden. That one is mugwort. I have some sage, again, that I grew from my garden. I love using herbs that I've grown myself. That's some thyme, little sprig of it. And last but not least, that is dandelion root. And I'm going to put that all in my mortar and pestle and grind that up. Now, these are all herbs that are associated with Hecate and magic, so that's why I chose to use those. You can use any herbs that you see fit. You do not have to do it exactly the way that I did. So now I'm grabbing my polymer clay, and I will have the link for that in the description below. You can use white clay if you prefer, or whatever color clay that you want. This was just what I had on hand. And I'm going to take a little pinch of the herbs that I've mixed in my mortar and pestle and sprinkle it into that little divot that I've made in the polymer clay. I'm taking out a couple of little bigger chunks because I don't want any big chunks of herbs in there. Now I'm taking some garlic, powdered garlic, because I already had powdered garlic. I didn't want to mess with trying to grind any up, and I just threw a little bit of that in there. I don't want very much garlic because I don't want the whole thing to smell like garlic. And now I am just going to squish it all together, and that's how you soften that polymer clay so that you can use it. You just work it with your hands so that the heat from your hands softens the clay, and squish it and stretch it, and it's just very fun. This whole time you could be focusing on your intention as you work. The next step is to grab my craft foam. As you can see, it's just got a little bit of added thickness. If you don't have craft foam, see what else you have around the house, maybe a piece of felt or something that you can attach around the outside of your tea light. And this just adds a little bit of wiggle room in your tea light candle holder that you're making so that when you set your tea light in there, it sets nicely. So the next step is I am grabbing the bottle from my garlic, and I just used it as a little rolling pin because I just use what I have on hand to make a little thin piece of the polymer clay. If I did this a second time, if I'm honest, I would probably make that a little thicker. I want to cut this piece of clay so that it's a little bit bigger around than my actual tea light. So I'm using a circle template, but again, you can use anything that you have around the house that's round. Just set it on there and trace around it. I'm using some sculpting tools that I have, but you know what works just as well is a pen or a pencil or a toothpick. Now I'm just kind of cleaning up the edges and putting it on the bottom of that tea light that we're going to sculpt this whole thing around. Now I'm getting ready to make the actual snake. And this is so simple. It's just rolling out a coil like you did when you were in school. I, if you'll notice, don't have any rings on. I decided to take my wedding ring off too. It can leave little dents in the clay as you work, so I usually, when I'm working with clay, don't have any jewelry on, which is weird for me. I figured out that if you lay an 8.5 by 11 size, just regular paper size piece of paper down, and you run that snake from one corner to the other, that's the perfect length to go around a tea light. So that was what I did. And what I'm doing here is I'm tapering the end. That's where the tail's going to go. So as you can see, it's kind of tapered as it goes down, which is just like a snake does. Now I'm making their little neck, just kind of because their body usually tapers there kind of near where their neck is a little bit. And watch how I shape the head. This is so easy. Watch. Squish it just like that. And then you end up with a snake head shape. Now it's kind of too full, so then I flatten it a little bit, and that's all there is to it. Just put your fingers together and push them together like that, and that will create the shape that you want for the snake's head, and then squish it a little flatter. And just kind of work with it a little bit until it looks kind of like the shape of a snake's head, and there you have it. Now I'm going to kind of squish them a little bit, and then put a little eye in. And again, I'm using this tool, but you don't have to use a tool like this. I've used a pencil before or a pen if that's just what I had on hand. And then I'm giving it little nostrils as well. And there is the basic form of our snake. As you can see, it goes pretty close to the top and the bottom. I'm just gonna lengthen that tail a little more. The more that you roll, the thinner it will become. So if you want to lengthen it where the tail is. Now, if you were wondering what that little bag from the garlic cloves is for, this is so cool. You guys are going to love this. So I cut one apart. As you can see, it's kind of stretchy, and I just kind of pull it apart so that it's kind of even on both sides. This is so cool, you guys. Once I figured this out, I was like, I have to share this with everybody. This makes the best snake scales. Just kind of stretch it across there and press it firmly into the top of your snake. Just going around, trying to keep it so that it doesn't shift or move. That's kind of the key to this. And really push it down in there. Get it on all the sides, as you can see, and the top, and really push it down. Once I was finished, I found a couple spots where I was like, I could have pushed that a little bit more, but you know, Nothing has to be perfect to be full of magic. As you can see, I'm really squooshing it. All right, and then as you pull it back, look at that, you guys. That literally looks just like a snake. I think it's pretty amazing. Look at that. It's like a perfect snake pattern. And that was so easy. So now I'm going to try to match it up really carefully to the last part where I took it off, because the material I'm using here isn't really long enough to reach and cover that whole snake. So I have to do it in sections. So I'm trying to match up one end to the other so that you get a seamless application of the scales. And I did pretty good, I think. So there I'm pushing it in, and just making sure that I've really pushed it a lot so that, you know, you get that pattern pushed into the snake. And as we peel it back, more is revealed. I just love the look of that. I think it's pretty darn cool. So I proceeded to do that throughout the whole snake. It took me 3 little sections. Now I'm going to take a little break, and I'm going to pop that in the refrigerator for like 10 minutes because it's going to make it easier to work with and less likely to squish that pattern back out of the snake when you work with it. So I've taken it back out of the fridge. And as you can see, I'm just kind of working with the coil to make it look how I want. It's going to be an exact replica, not exact, but it's going to be pretty close. As you can see, you can really just play around with it until you get it exactly how you want it. Now I am sealing the little bottom part that we put originally to the coil of the actual snake. And you can do that just like I'm doing it, basically pushing the clay together with any kind of tool. You can use a pencil or anything that you have on hand. And I just kind of work that until it's literally squished together. Now I've got a little spot there that's open where I can see the tea light underneath the snake. And nobody's going to see this part, you guys. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to squish some clay and push it in there and do the same thing. Just pushing that clay together with the tool. And now I'm removing the tea light. And this takes a little bit of work because it kind of wants to fuse to it. But just kind of work it gently until you get that to come out. And then I'm pushing it down because it was a little thinner than it should have been, and it kind of wanted to pull up. But at the end of the day, I think I ended up with a pretty cool looking little tea light candle. I'm really happy with this. So this polymer clay, you need to bake it. And I will put the temperature and time that I did here on the, yeah, it'll be up there on the screen. I just put it in a glass baking dish. And then I set the tea light in there one last time to make sure that it didn't shift when I moved it because the clay is still soft. Then I pop it in the oven and set the timer on my phone. Once it comes out and it's cool, definitely wait till it's cool, you can paint it. I just used this really cheap paint that I got from Walmart of all places, no big deal. It's acrylic paint, and I'm using a dry brush method, which means that I'm barely coating my brush, and I kind of take some off on some paper so that it's just a barely coated brush, because all I want to do is paint the top part of that pattern. So what you see underneath is the black coming through. I thought that was a really cool way to paint it. If you do a different color, like if you do a white one, you might want to use a different technique for painting it, but this worked pretty well. I was really happy with that. And I just went around. That is actually silver paint that I've used. And I'll pop a screenshot up there of the paint because I totally forgot to show you in the video the paint that I used. But I just used in this wide brush and just brushing it on very gently so that it only touches the top part of those scales, leaving the darkness behind them. And that's how it turned out. I decided that I thought it needed some green on it too, so I also grabbed this little green color and I went right around all of the other stripes and added the green. And you know, it really didn't take very long. It didn't have to be super exact. And I kind of have a little bit of black in between the colors, which looks pretty cool. You can paint yours however you want. You don't have to paint it this way. I just figured I should show you my technique in case you want to try using it.
Another technique, if you have a white clay that you're using, is you might want to use a really thin wash to paint over the whole thing and then brush it off the surface of the scales, leaving the darker color in the crevices. So there's several different ways that you can do this. Just like with all the spells that I show you here and all the crafts as well, I think it's really important to remember that I don't want you to have to feel like you should duplicate exactly what I'm doing. It's more of a jumping off place. I love to see you show your creativity and take an idea and really bring it to life and make it your very own. Do your own thing with it. You know, use whatever herbs you feel guided to and make it the shape that you want it to be and paint it how you want. But I just love this idea of taking the illustration that I had in this book and turning it into something real that you can actually use and hold in your hand and use for your witchcraft. And at the end of the day, that's the point of witchcraft anyway, is to make your life what you want it to be, take charge of things, and be creative. And that's what I mean when I say be your magic. What I mean is the magic is yours and should be unique to you. Don't be my magic or anybody else's. Be your magic. That's the whole point.
I'm so pleased with how this turned out. I think you can make one too. As you can see, it was easier than it looked. If you do make one and you share a pic of it on social media, be sure to tag me so that I can see your version. Thanks so much for joining me in celebrating the achievement of this book being a finalist for the 2022 COVR Award. And I'll let you know in a short video what the outcome is on June 12th, once we've found out the results after the award ceremony. Also, good luck to all my fellow authors and illustrators who are up for awards too. Don't forget to share this video with your friends. They might enjoy seeing behind the scenes of these book illustrations, and maybe they would like to try making this snake candle holder too. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed and cast a spell on the notification bell so that you'll be magically notified as soon as I upload a new video. Thanks again for visiting me here in my studio. I have a couple more videos that you might enjoy. I'll see you next time. Until then, I hope you stay safe, happy, and healthy. And remember, as always, to be your magic. Bye, everybody.